Hi, my name is Wilna Castillo, and I am here with Mr. Knepper, who is running for U.S. Senate as a Republican for the state of Florida. Now, I've been doing a little research on you, and I know you're passionate when it comes to Cuba, Latin America, and Venezuela. Now, with all the problems that we have here in the U.S., why are you so concerned with Latin America? Do you mind sharing your views?
No, not at all. I am very passionate about Latin America and Cuba and Venezuela. Now, let's start off with Latin America as a whole. We have Cuba 90 miles off our coast, and I'll get to Cuba in just a second. But we cannot forget that when we destroyed and finish off ISIS and any other fanatical group in the Middle East that threatens America or American interests, which we will do, we cannot afford to have Latin America be any type of a breeding ground for, number one, communism from Cuba along the rest of Latin America. We saw what happened in Venezuela, and we cannot allow Latin America to financially fall. This is serious, and while we're spending all of our time in one area of the world, we're ignoring Latin America to a certain extent. Now, as far as Cuba and Venezuela, this is an unbelievable situation, absolutely unbelievable. Let's start with Cuba. Cuba is a country that is small, but the people of Cuba have been under a regime for over 50 years. The regime has, without question, destroyed numerous lives for people that are already in Cuba, and they've destroyed the lives of people that exiled out of Cuba. And if you go back to when the Bay of Pigs occurred, at that time, we, at the Kennedy administration, supported an overthrow of that government. In the middle of that Bay of Pigs, we turned our planes around and left that regime in power. And we left it in power, and the sanctions from one administration to the next, kept the sanctions on. But it didn't work. Now, the issue here is that we have been around the world for freedom. And Cuba is 90 miles off this coast. The sanctions do not work. And the bottom line, and it's a very touchy subject because I'm in Miami and I have Cuban friends that are dear to me for over 28 years. So I'm close to that issue, very close. I've watched the way that they've had to deal with not being able to see their families. I've gone back and seen, which everybody else saw, the documentaries of the Peter Pan children that left and waved out the window of those planes, believing they were just going away for a temporary period of time. And if anybody watches those videos and those documentaries, it would have to break somebody's heart. Now the issue is that I'm in Miami, and there are two sides to the story about the people being free. I take the position that I want the people of Cuba liberated. I am so close to certain people where I've watched the exiles live in terrible agony with their families not having the medicine that they need, not having the care that they need, and it's ruined families that are exiled out, and the people in Cuba should be liberated. And I believe that it is time that Congress would, at some point in time, sooner than later, consider the possibility of the use of force. Now, I have to be careful because I'm not Cuban, but I do believe that if it continues and we don't take some type of an action, we're going to have another 10 years pass, or maybe even longer than that, and an entire generation will be wiped out and under a regime. A dictator is not going to change. Just because Fidel Castro leaves, his brother is going to remain in power. And no dictator is going to leave. Freedom is not giving people more access to cell phones or travel or visiting hotels. That's not freedom. It's a regime that is absolutely 90 miles off our coast. It's not a threat to the United States directly at this time, naturally, but it's not. It can promote communism through the rest of Latin America. But more important than that is that 90 miles off this coast is an island that's imprisoned its people. It has one of the worst human rights records. We don't even know how bad it is till we finally get into the prisons. But it is absolutely essential that I hope that Congress will eventually look at the possibility of the use of force. And the reason why I'm careful in this area about the use of the force is because, as I've said before, I'm not Cuban, but we have to take into consideration of the views of the Cuban people here in Miami and the rest of the country that are Cuban, and it's important to have a dialogue. But the bottom line is, in our history, we have when it's necessary, and when people cannot speak for themselves, and they're under a dictatorship, and not a nice dictatorship. A dictatorship is a dictatorship, and this is one that has one of the worst in history. I don't think it should be measured by the size of the country or the resources that they have. But if you're close to anybody that is from Cuba and witnessed what they have to go through, it's unbelievable. I try to tell people that people can visit their family from Florida all the way to California, but you're talking about people that are here in Miami that can't go 90 miles across to have visit their families. Some of them, they can't come here. This is a total dictatorship at its worst, and I hope and I pray that one day a president of the United States will broadcast to the American people that Cuba people have been liberated, and they've been liberated by American forces.
So you're suggesting we should invade Cuba or Venezuela?
No, I'm not. I want to be careful in this. I've been quoted before that I said that we should invade Cuba. I don't think the word, well, you can use any word you want. I mean, the word invade is something that is a particular, any way you look at it, you're bringing down a regime and you're liberating a people. So I don't want to use the word invade. You would hope that the regime would, probably not, but you would hope that the regime would have enough common sense not to try to resist U.S. forces, but not likely. Naturally, you would try to bring the civilian casualties to a minimum. But I'm going to repeat it again, and I would ask people to go back to the videos and the documentaries, and go back to the Peter Pan children boarding that plane, go back to the history of the last 50 years, what this regime has done to a people, and the sanctions don't work. And I'm going to say it one more time, and I hope in my lifetime, and I hope even if it's not in my lifetime, but the sooner the better, that I hope that a president of the United States one day will broadcast to the American people the following words: that the Cuban people have finally been liberated and are now free, and that the American forces have done that, and that we have liberated a people that deserve to be free. Everyone deserves to be free. And this dictatorship has 90 miles off our coast, have basically destroyed a country, they've destroyed a people, and as I said, I hope dialogue will get into the area of this. It's very touchy, this subject, but it's very dear to my heart, and I feel the pain because I have some Cuban friends that are close to me, and they are beautiful people, and they are like all people, but but they are special people. They've endured a terrible, terrible situation, and it's unbelievable what they have gone through. So I hope again that this dialogue could happen. Venezuela is another disaster. The United States foreign policy has to change in many areas. We have to be a leader of the world. And one president once said this, and I'm going to quote him. And he resigned from office, and I've many times have been told, don't mention his name, but I'm going to, because although this president that resigned did some things that were wrong, but he said some things that were right. And President Nixon said this, and he was very clear on his farewell speech when he resigned from office, that the United States must be the leader of the world. There is nobody else that we can advocate that to. There is no country in the world that will be the leader of the world. And if we are the leader of the world, there will be less wars, there will be less starvation. And if we are the leader of the world, there will be much more freedom, there will be less wars, and we must be the leader of the world. And this is why we have so many problems around the world. So all of Latin America must be in the interest of the United States. And Venezuela right now needs the help of the United States. Some other countries in Latin America need our help. But Cuba has gone on long enough. And I hope that we can have dialogue in that. I will say one thing, the Senator Rubio, this is the one thing I will say in his favor. He has tried on the Senate floor to express to the Congress and the American people how horrible it is in Cuba. He hasn't stepped over that line where he has asked for U.S. forces, and I'm not faulting him for that. This is one subject that when it comes to Mr. Rubio and myself, we both agree that the regime is absolutely horrifying and what it's done. People coming over from Cuba, I believe that if they step foot here, the wet foot policy should remain. And I just very, very to my heart for the Cuban people and the Venezuelan people and everybody else in Latin America. And that's all I have to say on that subject.
Well, thank you so much again. It's always great to have you.
It's my pleasure with your questions, and I appreciate the effort that you've been making here very much for the voters of Florida.
Well, once again, this is Mr. Knepper running for U.S. Senate as a Republican for the state of Florida. Thank you.